The town of Red Hollow stood on the edge of a wide prairie, where wind moved like a living thing, and the days wore on with a steady, unspoken patience. On a spring morning that smelled of rain just breaking, Ellery Reed stood at the edge of the churchyard with his hands shoved in his coat pockets, watching the last of the dew bead on the grass. In the church stood his cousin Mara Reed, the bride-to-be, whose calm face had never shown fair until now. The preparations were loud with the bustle of women in aprons and the sharper clinks of silverware and glassware being settled into place. Yet the noise never quite reached Mara. Her mind was on the man who stood at the far corner of the room. Waiting with a severity that frightened even him, the groom was Eli Calder, a man who measured his life in square miles of land, the size of his belt buckle, and the likelihood of a good harvest. He had a straight gaze that could fell a man in his tracks, and a voice so steady people said he could talk a storm into submission. Eli had decided to marry Mara because some things in life aren't chosen. So much is mandated by fate or by the stubbornness of two stubborn people who finally grow used to each other's stubbornness. The joke came before vows. Before Ben, the preacher, cleared his throat and looked down at the old Bible with weathered hands, as if it might suddenly glow and reveal the universe's joke to be a single sentence long. The line came from Eli's best man, a man named Cole Stanford, who loved to lighten any room with a rough laugh and a rougher joke. "Brother Eli," Cole said with a playful grin that hid something sharper, "you're about to wed a bride who's infamous for one thing: she's infertile. Not a single seed in the crop, not a single echo in the cradle. You'll have to plant your own field with nothing but sunlight and hope, old boy." A few snickers rolled through the room. Mara's heart dropped a notch, then another. Infertile. The word sat in the air like a stone in a river, and it didn't belong there. It hurt the one who carried it, and shook the town that believed itself above such petty wounds. Mara's eyes found Eli's, and she saw him looking back at her with a grin that didn't quite reach his mouth, almost as if he too wasn't sure where the joke lived in him anymore. The ceremony was supposed to be simple: a vow, a shared breath, a kiss that would send them both toward a future built on trust. But the joke made Mara feel not loved, but observed, not wanted, but consumed by the town's small talk. When she heard the echo of laughter again, she took a breath that tasted like old coins and old promises and stepped away from the light of the church door toward the road that led out of town. Part 2. The separation. Mara rode out on a day when the sky wore a pale gray hat and wind braided itself into the stripes of a storm. Ellery rode with her, not because he believed the rumor, but because somebody had to keep her from going too far. He did not understand the wound that the joke had opened in Mara's heart, an ache that said she was seen by everyone but truly known by no one. "You don't have to go far, Mara," Ellery said, when the horse's hooves pressed into the dry road, scattering the dust into thin, pale spirals. "Red Hollow isn't all the world has." She smiled, but it was small and trembled at the corners. "No, maybe not. But it's a start." She paused, looking out at the hills where the prairie settled into distant blue. "If I stay, I'll be the thing people point to, proof that a woman can be married and still be a joke." Ellery did not answer for a long moment. Then, with a kind of blunt kindness he had learned from his father, he said, "If the right man believes in you, Mara, you don't need the town's approval." "I'm not sure there's a right man," she whispered, more to the horse's mane than to him. The road widened, and the ride carried them toward a place none of them could quite name on a address on a map that only Mara could see as real. That night, Mara found herself in a small boarding house above a lonesome market, where a kettle sang with the memory of better days and a window looked out onto the same prairie that had once been her childhood's horizon. She slept with a reed-thin mattress, the room smelling faintly of lavender soap and smoke. The next morning, a letter waited for her at the desk in the common room. It was from a man named Tomaz Hatto, a cousin she hadn't known she had, and who still lived in a place called Hollow Creek, a few days' ride east. The letter was short and sharp as a blade. "Come home if you want to talk sense into the fool who laughed at you. If you want your own truth to speak, come to Hollow Creek. You'll find your answer there. Bring nothing but your name and your courage." Mara folded the letter and tucked it into her sleeve. She took another breath and headed for the door that would take her back, toward a truth she hadn't yet dared imagine. Clocks in Red Hollow, both public and private, fell silent as the news of Mara's departure moved through the town like a winter storm. The wedding was postponed, then canceled, and the town found itself listening to the wind instead of its own gossip for a moment, as if silence might heal what laughter could not. Part 3. The return and the revelation. 2 months passed in a stillness that felt almost sacred. Mara traveled, learned a few stories from other frontier people, and kept a careful watch on the road to Hollow Creek. She did not want to go back to Red Hollow too quickly. She wanted to see what happened to a heart when it's left to find its own way home. The day Mara returned to Red Hollow, the town's salt air carried another scent, the scent of rain in the air, the earth absorbing it with a wet sigh. She rode in on a horse that had seen its share of roads, a horse that wore a tired but patient look in its eyes. The townspeople stood along the street, not sure what to expect, and the wind kept its cool. As if listening to the rumor itself, Eli was there, standing near the public square with a simple, stern look. A look that had grown on him during the months Mara was away. He did not rush to her, did not call her by a nickname or greet her with the ease of two people who had learned each other's habits too well. He looked at her with that same stare that had once seemed almost kind, and asked the simplest question that could hold 1,000 answers. "Where have you been, Mara?" Her mouth opened a little and closed again. The words stuck somewhere between her chest and her throat. Then she drew a breath and spoke. "To Hollow Creek. I found something there that changed everything," the crowd murmured. A low, unsettled sound, as if they could feel a shift in the ground beneath them. A boy, no more than 8 or 9, pushed through the legs of the adults and stepped forward, his face a pale echo of someone Mara had once known. The child had Mara's eyes, a bright, searching green that could see straight through a lie and straight into a heart's truth. "Are you Mara?" he asked, his voice small but confident. She knelt down, hands open, and the boy looked at her with the same calm steadiness she had once seen in her own father's gaze when he spoke of honest work and straight roads. The boy extended a hand to her. It's not to greet a stranger, but to remind a mother that the next part of their journey would be walked together. At that moment, a woman stepped forward from the crowd, a grandmother with lines like rivers threading down her cheeks. She spoke without anger, and with a kind of weathered wisdom that could only come from weather, years, and the frontier's unspoken rules. "I'm Martha Harrow. Tomas told you to come. We've waited for you to come home. If this is the truth you kept, then you've brought something more than a vow to this town." Mara stood, the boy's hand in hers, and the room's quiet thickened like a blanket. The truth she carried was not a story of infertility, but of a life carried forward, one she hoped to share with Eli, whom she had loved and left, and with a child she had found along the road and now held to her chest like a small, living answer. Part 4. The shock that brought a new light. The infant's name was not yet spoken aloud in Red Hollow, but the boy who clung to Mara's side with fierce trust belonged to a world the town did not expect to see up close, one where a woman who had been told she could not bear a child could still bear not just a child, but a whole future within her arms. Towns answered its first restless murmur was a mix of astonishment and awe. Some stood with arms crossed and eyes narrowed, certain that Mara's return signaled trouble, a scandal she could not outrun. Others, younger and more open-hearted, saw in the child a chance for something new, a family that could be bigger than a single pair of parents, a family made from two people's shared courage and from the town's growing willingness to believe in second chances. But the real shock, the one that made the headlines in the gossip mills of Red Hollow, came when Mara spoke to Eli in the square, not with a sermon, but with a quiet, patient honesty. "Eli," she began, keeping her voice gentle, "I told you a joke once and it wasn't funny to me. It wasn't funny at all. I am not infertile in the way your friend said I was. I can bear nothing if you're asking about the future you'd hoped for, but I can bear this child, and I can bear the future we choose together." Eli's eyes widened. Not with anger, but with a kind of frightened relief. He looked at Mara, then at the child who had found her, and finally at himself, as if seeing his life in a new light for the first time. "Are you telling me this is our child?" he asked, his voice dropping to a softer tone. "No," Mara said, finally letting herself say the real words she'd rehearsed in her sleep and rehearsed again in the nights she had spent alone on the road. "This child is not mine to claim as property, not mine to own or to confine. This child is a life we've been gifted with, and we can choose how to raise it for now. Here, with the truth between us." Colin Donovan, the town's blacksmith, who had watched the exchange with a curious mix of skepticism and pride, came forward then with a simple observation that carried more gravity than the town expected. "If you two can choose to love this boy," he said, nodding toward the child, "then you can choose to love each other. And you can choose to fight for a future that isn't just about land or reputation." That was the moment when the town began to shift its view, not in a roar, but in a small, stubborn ember of hope. Part 5. A Hidden Past. A shared future. What Mara had brought back was more than a child. It was a trail led by a map of memories and new possibilities that would lead them all to a different future. The child's father, or rather the story of his father, was not central to the town's salvation. What mattered was the revelation that Mara wasn't the joke or the burden the town had made her. Mara explained the rest to Eli in a nightlit room where the wind spoke in long, clean sentences, and the rain began as a whisper and ended as a gentle, cleansing chorus. "I didn't tell you because I thought you'd see me as less," she said softly, tracing the line of his jaw with her finger, as if to reassure both of them that the present could be different from the past. "And when I left, I went to Hollow Creek for someone else's truth, the truth of a life that didn't end with a wedding's kiss or a rumor's sting. I found it, and it found me." Eli did not interrupt. He sat, listening as if the room itself could offer him a piece of wisdom he needed. He looked at Mara with a tenderness that surprised him, a tenderness he had not thought himself capable of giving after a lifetime of keeping. "Every door locked. I'm not a perfect man," he finally said, the confession spilling out in a rough, unpolished stream. "My hands are rough, my temper's quick, and my heart's sometimes slow to forgive. But if this is a chance for you, if this is a chance for UF to put something right after we've made a dozen mistakes, then I want to take that chance." Mara rested her head against his shoulder and listened to his breath come and go, with a rhythm that felt like home. The romance that grew in the town's quiet corners was not a struggle for passion as much as a struggle for patience, for trust being earned, for a space where two people could love a child who was not birthed of their own bodies, but chosen by their hearts. Part 6. The climax, a wedding, interrupted the period of quiet reflection, did not last long. A late spring storm rolled across Red Hollow, and with it came a confrontation that would test Mara and Eli in the worst way and in the best way at the same time. Outlaws, who had learned of the town's new money, the land that would grow corn and hope if people were willing to work a trode into Red Hollow. With the wind at their backs and a thirst for trouble, they believed that Mara's gift to them would be a fortune. If only she would tell them where the extra money lay hidden, or who could be bribed to keep quiet. The night Mara's guests arrived in the town square. The same young boy who had clung to Mara's side a few weeks ago stood by the church door with a crown of wildflowers in his hair, a sign that innocence could still survive in a town that had learned to fear the world beyond its borders. The humans in that room, including Mara and Eli, felt that fear thrumming through them as the door burst open in a blast of wind and the hammer of rain. The leader of the outlaws leaned into the room, grin wide enough to remind them of a wolf in a field of sheep. He asked, with a voice that could cut stone, "Where is the prize, Miss Mara? You've brought us the one thing we want, the key to your husband's heart, the heart that is supposed to make you a mother." Mara looked at Eli, who stood with his arms crossed, a shield and a weapon in one, and at the boy who watched them with bright, fearless eyes. She did not flinch. She did not blink. She considered the choice before her as if it was a riddle that would determine whether they would survive the night. "You can take me," Mara said evenly, "but you will not touch the innocent boy. You will not destroy the trust I've found in this town. If you want to come in peace, come in. If not, leave and never return." The leader sneered, his plan to terrorize the town slipping through his fingers as he realized he could not get what he wanted without harming those who hadn't earned their fate in the moment. The town rose with a quiet flood of courage. The outlaws were driven off by the help of the towns men in a chorus of shouts from the people who had learned to protect their families and their future. The wedding that had been paused at the altar 2 hours ago, a joke, now found its moment in the storm's aftermath. The town gathered, Mara and Eli at its center, and Mara's small, brave son standing tall just behind her. The Reverend James, a man who had once doubted Mara's ability to carry a future, stood with a tear in his eye as he watched a new family emerge from the shadows of a rumor. "Family," he said softly, as if the word were a delicate thing to be held with both hands. "Isn't that what we are if we choose to be? We are a family, not because we chose to begin in the ideal of two people, but because we chose to keep faith with the life we've built together." People nodded, and Mara felt something she had never dared to name blooming inside her chest, a hope that had the weight and warmth of the sun. Chapter 7. Healing under the western sky. Weeks turned into months, and the town began to feel something like peace. The healing came not because the fear disappeared or the gossip ceased, but because the people of Red Hollow chose to stand by one another. Mara's son, the boy who had walked into the church that night with the crown of wildflowers, grew into a sturdy child who asked for his mother's hand before bed and was given the same tenderness every child deserved. The baby's arrival had changed Mara in ways she hadn't expected. It gave her a purpose that did not depend on the lies of a town or the judgments of a wedding that could have broken her. She found her own voice again in the lines of the boy's creative stories, in the quiet tenderness she offered him when the world seemed uncertain, and in the way she looked at Eli no longer as a man who might abandon her to a life of rumor, but as a partner who would stand by her side and grow with her in the face of life's storms. Eli's own transformation was smaller but significant. He learned to listen to Mara's fear without laughing it away, to trust her when her mind raced with possibilities and the heart needed a rest, and to see how a family does not mean a perfect ending, but a shared endurance through imperfect days. The town's elders finally spoke with a guarded candor that felt almost new. The infertile bride joke had taught them a hard lesson. Whispers can kill as surely as a blade, but a truth spoken with kindness can heal the wounded place where rumors once lived. In the first golden light of a late spring morning, Mara walked with her son along the edge of the prairie. The land stretched wide, a map of possibilities, and a quiet train of freedom rolled toward the horizon. She turned to Eli and offered him a small, hopeful smile. "Do you think this is real?" she asked softly. He took her hand, the one that rested on the boy's shoulder, and looked out at the large open space where the land met the sky. "If we choose to keep walking, Mara, the world will answer us back with more than we ever asked for. It will give us a chance to get it right for once." Her eyes filled with quiet tears, not of heartbreak, but of relief that the fear of the past could be replaced by the certainty of a future. She leaned into him, and the boy pressed his cheek against her side as if to lend his small strength to their shared life. As the sun burned away the last of the morning mist, the family stood on the edge of the prairie, under the vast, endless western sky. The wind carried the scent of rain that might come later, the scent of new earth, and the smell of a home no longer a rumor, but a reality. The story of Mara, Eli, and their unexpected son was no longer a tale whispered in corners or told by the fire's pale glow. It was a declaration written in wide, open fields, the kind of declaration that the frontier makes when it chooses to forgive, to adapt, and to love again. Epilogue. A new kind of promise. Red Hollow didn't become a perfect place, but it became a place where a heart could heal and a child could grow with two adults who pledged to be patient. brave, and true. The joke that had once betrayed Mara became a simple, cautionary tale told to the town's children. Not to wound, but to remind them of the power of words and the possibility of second chances. And if you stood at the edge of the prairie on a quiet evening and watched the sun slip behind the hills, you might have seen a silhouette: the woman Mara, the man Eli, and the little boy between them walking toward an even larger horizon. The horizon where every life, no matter how broken, can be made whole by the patient, stubborn, hopeful magic of love.